Okay, I think we are ready to start, colleagues. Just by way of introduction, my name is Lumalu Vokhalani. I am the project coordinator for the Africa-US City Relations Project at the African Center for the Study of the United States at Wits University. So the Africa-US City Relations Project is one of the flagship programs in which the African Center for the Study of the United States has established its presence as a center of knowledge production and policy outreach. Through the program, the center has been able to highlight the role that cities play to advance urban development, cultural interactions, as well as diplomacy. As the Africa-US City Relations Project, we particularly focus on the connections between the concepts and practices between smart cities, 15-minute cities, charter cities, as well as city-to-city university exchange programs between Africa and US cities. And this webinar is here to expand on the concept of 15-minute cities, which is one of our key themes in the project. I'll hand over to the director of the center, Dr. Bob Wekesa, just to give us a glimpse about the center. Over to you, Doc.
Thank you very much, Luma, and most welcome, colleagues, into this virtual space. We are delighted that you could join us for today's 15-minute city webinar. Personally, I look forward to getting to understand how cities can be 15 minutes, given that cities are, large, geopolitical areas. But we have a very good cast of experts on these matters and more broadly smart cities. Mine is just in addition to welcoming you to just briefly mention that we are the African Center for the Study of the United States at the University of the Witwatersrand here in Johannesburg, South Africa. The name Witwatersrand can be long and complicated. So sometimes we just say Wits University. And I can assure you, we are one of the leading universities on the African continent. And so on the basis of the university's, agenda of teaching, research, and public engagement, we established the African Center for the Study of the United States, which we simply call ACSUS, in March 2018, to focus on the study, research, and teaching and public engagement on the US as a global power, as a society, and as a people. And once we set off with the African Center for the Study of the US, we established a number of projects. As my colleague Kluma has mentioned, the Africa-US Cities project was actually one of the early projects that we kicked off. But we also do work in other areas of Africa-US diplomacy, Africa-US diaspora relations, Africa-US culture, Africa-US trade and economics. And in fact, all these dimensions and components of our center kind of fall into cities because they happen within cities, as it were. So the city is indeed a hub, even in the terms of our disciplinary understanding. I also just want to mention that the experts, and they will be introduced shortly, that are on this call are very close to our center. Once we started the Africa-US Cities initiative, we got in touch with charter cities, and we worked together. In fact, at the height of the pandemic, COVID pandemic, we did produce some knowledge on charter cities as a concept. In fact, it is quite a coincidence that last year, Charter Cities organized a conference in Kigali, Rwanda, and my colleague who leads this project, Kluma, actually went to Kigali, and that's where he met one of our other speakers, one of now partner, Willy Vos from Waterfall City, which is a major smart city in South Africa and on the continent. We think this is a very important topic because, the population of, the urban population of the continent now sits up at slightly over 600 million people. We expect that the continent is going to be nearly 2.5 billion people by 2050. It's a rapidly urbanizing continent. So we need all the strategies we can lay our hands on as a continent transitions from an essentially agrarian, rural-based one to a highly urban, continent or urbanized continent. And therefore, the concept of 15-minute cities, as will be laid out today, kind of seems to be one of the ideas that we could leverage to address the real issues that the continent faces in terms of all matters to do with urban spaces. And so, as I mentioned, I'm not an expert on this. I also look forward to learning. And so over to my colleague Pluma to take us to the next steps. And most welcome again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doc. Now we'll move on to our panelists. First, we have Matthew Mackney, who's a senior researcher at the Charter Cities Institute, as well as Tommy Thompson, who's a quantitative researcher at the Charter Cities Institute as well. Matthew and Tommy will interchangeably explore the concept of 15-minute cities, informing us what 15-minute cities are, their role, as well as the pros and cons of 15-minute cities. After Matthew and Tommy, we'll hand over to Willy Vos, who is the CEO of Waterfall Management City Company, who provide us with a synopsis of what effect 15-minute cities, or rather urban development, has had in South Africa, particularly looking at Waterfall City that presents, or rather resembles, the principles of 15-minute cities. Over to you, Matthew and Tommy. Thank you.
Yes, and thanks for having us. So I think I will begin by giving a brief overview of 15-minute city, and afterwards Matt and I will kind of discuss our thoughts on the concept. So 15-minute city is this concept that all of our daily amenities should be within a 15-minute walk or bike ride from where we live. So wherever we live, we should be able to access grocery stores, doctors, our job, places to shop, restaurants, bars, school, all within a 15-minute walk or bike ride. The idea was first coined by Carlos Moreno in 2017, 2018. He's an urban scholar in Paris. And the way he conceived of the idea, he wanted all cities to be this kind of collection of 15-minute neighborhoods, right? So that if you pick a city, you live anywhere in that city, you'll be able to access all of your daily amenities within a 15-minute walk or bike ride. So it's not necessarily that the entire city itself must be accessible within 15 minutes. It's just that the entire city is a patchwork of these 15-minute neighborhoods, so that wherever you live, you can just be a 15-minute walk or bike ride away from things you need. Of course, this idea is not new. There have been many iterations of it before. If we look at the old cities of Europe and Asia, they already are 15-minute cities in their own right. So if you go to Paris, you go to Tokyo, and you live anywhere in those cities, you can easily be within a 15-minute walk or bike ride of all of your daily amenities. In the history of urban planning, there's also been this idea that we should build cities as dense walkable areas. If we go back to 1929, Clarence Perry, one of the urban planners of New York City, he wanted to reshape New York City as these collection of 15-minute, a collection of these dense walkable neighborhoods. Right, so he wanted to take New York City, he wanted to carve it up into these small neighborhoods where each neighborhood is a self-contained area where you can access all of your daily amenities within a walk, but you still have access to the broader city. And so what's the appeal of this model? It's really a reaction to cars and the rise of automobiles. When cars developed, newer cities started to form in a very sprawled manner. So in the United States, where there was large urban development, they rebuilt cities to accommodate the car. In the global south, where cities and urbanization are newer, such as in Africa and some parts of Asia, cities are also built primarily to require a car. Right? So if you think of these cities, if you don't have a car, it's very hard to access any of your amenities. It's unsafe. There are a lot of fast cars moving around, so that if you walk, you might get hit by one. Amenities are placed very far from each other. So if you don't have a car, it'll take a long time to commute or to walk. And it was a reaction to this way of doing urban development that 15-minute cities was hoping to address. And so some of the purported benefits of 15-minute cities is that it promotes health. If you integrate walking to your daily life instead of driving, you can integrate exercise. It promotes social connection. Instead of always just sitting in your car and driving to different areas. You can walk, you can take public transit, you can interact with your neighbors and other people in the city on a daily basis. It's better for the environment because we reduce the carbon footprint of private cars. It can also accelerate economic agglomeration because everybody lives close together. They interact with each other on a daily basis. They can share economic ideas and they can share economic benefit. And one of the reasons the term has been in the media recently is because of the COVID-19 lockdown. When cities locked down, people weren't allowed to travel very far from their home. And so it forced people to re-examine what their city should look like. And it placed a new emphasis on local access. If we can't go very far away from our home, we should be able to access all of these daily amenities in a shorter distance. And so that's what spurred the appeal and interest in 15-minute city. And thus far, a lot of municipal leaders, especially in the West, have taken to this idea. One of the big examples is Anne Hidalgo, the mayor of Paris. She is trying to redesign Paris to be more 15-minute city-esque. She built more bike lanes, she reduced car access and expanded pedestrian spaces. And so the way to achieve this model, the 15-minute city model, is to build more pedestrian spaces so that it's easier for people to walk around to different amenities and it's safe to do so. You don't have to cross, large streets with fast-moving traffic. It's safe to walk around and it's easy to walk around. And people are encouraged to leave behind their car. Second, you need to have high density. You need to have a lot of people living in a small area so that they can so that there's enough consumer demand for these various amenities. And the last thing I want to note is that the 15-minute city concept is just a concept, it's a framework. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything needs to be accessed within 15 minutes, literally. It could be 20 minutes, it could be 25 minutes. It could be some amenities some specialized amenities that may not be accessible within 15 minutes. For example, we might not need to have an energy plant in every single neighborhood. So if you work in an energy plant, you might have to travel further than 15 minutes. But it's really just a framework to make cities more walkable, to make it more community focused, and to kind of design neighborhoods in that way.
Oh, thanks very much, Tommy. A quick introduction. So Professor Matthew McCartney, I've been with Charter Cities as a senior researcher for the last 2.5 years. I come from 20 years as a university professor. I'm an economist by background. I was at SOAS in London and University of Oxford, and my teaching research specialization was the economic development, particularly of India and Pakistan. To kind of boil down to a kind of very kind of personal micro level, I live in Tooting in South London. I don't have a car and I've never learned to drive. I have a 3-year-old daughter. It's great. Her school is less than 10 minutes walk away, which means a lot of her friends live in walking distance. There's a park 5 minutes away. Any crisis at breakfast time, I can buy milk within a 10-minute walk, and the hospital where my daughter was born is 10 minutes walk away. So I live in what in many ways is a 15-minute neighborhood, and those are some of the key reasons why we picked this particular location to move to. But a 15-minute neighborhood makes for a very convivial day-to-day life. It's not why, and it doesn't contribute to the fact of London being a great city, a kind of global city or a world city. And I think there is a fundamental difference between what makes for a good city or a great city and just a collection of 15-minute neighborhoods. So give me an example. For my birthday last year, I got a ticket for the theatre. Now, there are something like 250 theatres in London. About 40 of those are concentrated in the West End. I went for dinner after the theatre to Chinatown, which has a huge choice of Chinese restaurants. And we can think of different areas in London as specialising in different types of consumption or production. And we can think of other cities. Bangalore in India, for example, is a great centre of ICT, in particular call centres. I'm not sure how to pronounce this, but Chaotu in China produces 60% of the world's buttons. Now, how do we explain that? We certainly can't explain that kind of what I would argue makes for great cities in any kind of relation to the idea of 15-minute cities. How we explain what makes for a functioning city, to my mind, goes back to Alfred Marshall in the 1890s, who was writing about, among other things, agglomeration externalities. He argued agglomeration, when you have skilled labor, kind of a large labor market, when firms have access to that labor, when they have easy access to a big pool of customers and potential input suppliers, when firms, workers and workers and workers and firms are interacting and there's spillovers of knowledge and information between them, then that leads to higher productivity, higher wages, a more dynamic kind of entrepreneurial or innovation culture, and greater cultural choice. So those theatres I was talking about for my birthday. My university life in SOAS in London, we had easy access to the government, a lot of other think tanks. We could organise talks, staff from embassies perhaps. By being based in London, we had an appeal to attract great students and staff who wanted the life of living in London. Research shows that when people are applying for patents, they're much more likely to cite research that has been produced in the same city because of this idea of cities being innovative hubs. So a city is fundamentally about being more than just a collection of villages, a collection of 15-minute neighborhoods. And so if we kind of transpose this to the context of African cities, I think in many ways, yes, African cities need to embrace this concept more of the 15-minute cities. People in African cities need to be, great to be within 15 minutes of a doctor or a school and a shop. And this is particularly relevant where many people don't have cars, where buses, minibuses are expensive and people are compelled to walk to access employment or basic needs. But I would also suggest that many of the failings of African cities are precisely because they're unable to operate as cities, that people are confined to fragmented neighborhoods and they're not experiencing the benefits of being in a big city. They're not experiencing the benefits of what Alfred Marshall was thinking about, agglomeration externalities. So cities thrive when there's the free and easy and cheap and quick flow of trade, of ideas, of people as consumers or workers. I said this boosts productivity, boosts innovation, leads to higher wages. But I think perhaps better messages or metrics, or perhaps complementary metrics, as well as this rather arbitrary 15 minutes of walking and cycling, we should be thinking of cities in terms of mobility and affordability. So in terms of mobility, many African cities suffer severe constraints on mobility. So congested roads, for example, or congested housing. Perhaps 60% of people are living in slums. A study in 2013 showed that from the city centre of London, within 45 minutes by public transport, one could access 54% of all the jobs in London. In Nairobi, by public transport from the centre, one could only access 6% of jobs in Nairobi. These constraints on mobility lead to food being expensive, lead to labor being expensive, have productivity costs, which mean African cities are expensive. They're expensive to live and work in. I mean, if you've been for a night out in Lusaka or Dar es Salaam, you see how much more expensive it is compared to Southeast Asian cities like Bangkok and Hanoi. And these high costs, these fact that African cities are fragmented and disconnected and not operating as entire economic entities, makes high-cost African cities, which makes it prohibitively expensive for African firms to produce manufactured goods and for those manufactured goods to be competitive on world markets. Second metric is that of affordability. So a study in the mid-2000s showed that informal travel tends to be very expensive in African cities. In 8 out of 11 cities studied, the average household could not afford a round trip by minibus. For the poorest quintile of the population, so the bottom 20% of the population, a round trip by minibus in Dar es Salaam cost more than 50% of average incomes. In Lagos, a round trip by minibus costs more than 100% of average incomes. So African cities are already fragmented into urban villages, into relatively sections which are relatively inaccessible to each other because of severe problems related to mobility and affordability. Individuals face this kind of difficult choice, affordability of housing, of living in slums and being close to work, or living in cheaper housing, affordable housing, and being isolated on the periphery with difficult access to jobs. Firms face, they actually in practice have a limited labor market because of people's inability to travel at reasonable cost. They have high costs of inputs. So I'd say yes to 15-minute cities in many different ways in terms of parks, public services, and this is particularly relevant in Africa where people are unable to afford travel by minibus. But really, the benefits of being in a city are different. It's a completely different idea from collections of 15-minute neighborhoods. Cities should work whether the entire city is a functioning labor market. I think we should be better thinking in terms of affordability and mobility. Those are the metrics which allow what Alfred Marshall, as I mentioned earlier, those agglomeration externalities to make cities productive, innovative, generate employment and reduce poverty. And how to generate that in African cities? One way of doing that is to learn from history. In London in the 19th century, affordability and mobility were enhanced by building railway lines from the newly constructed suburbs into the centre. In the 20th century America, this was through highways and cars. In more recent Shanghai, this has been done through the development of an extensive underground system. In Singapore, Hong Kong, or New York, this has been done by building upwards, building tenements, building skyscrapers to bring dense masses of populations next to or in close proximity to their places of work. So I say a big yes in many ways to the idea of 15-minute cities, but in the end, I think it's a fairly limiting concept, and we shouldn't think about entire cities in terms of the 15-minute concept. Cities are fundamentally different from being a collection of small villages, and better metrics to judge the functioning, successful functioning or otherwise of a city are affordability and mobility. Okay, thank you very much. I think back to Tommy.
Yeah, so Matt came in with like a little bit of a critical perspective, and I think he made some really good points. It kind of gets, if you've been following the 15-minute city debate, it kind of gets to the heart of it. So 15-minute cities are cities that's just a collection of smaller 15-minute neighborhoods where you can access everything in the daily that you need for the day. And one interpretation of that is it's really just all of these small neighborhoods that are self-contained. So you might live in one neighborhood, you might have access to your job, to all of your amenities, and you might not want to travel to other parts of the city. And so in that way, I think Matt is highlighting how the 15-minute city concept can be very fragmenting. I think another way to interpret it is you have these collection of these smaller 15-minute neighborhoods, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're self-contained, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't go from one neighborhood to another. And I think if we design cities in this way, where it's a collection of these smaller 15-minute neighborhoods, but also that mobility across the entire city is promoted, that leads to a more stronger and more resilient city. I think if we were to, so I would say that the 15-minute city concept is almost a necessary component of building these larger labor market as cities, to build these cities that are accessible to the entire population, these cities where it's easy to travel around. I feel like building them in a 15-minute city's way would be sort of the way to do it. One example we can think of is, let's say we didn't have all of our daily amenities accessible within our own neighborhood. By necessity, we'd have to travel to other neighborhoods as well. And so that would overburden some of the transit network, and that would just lead to a bigger problem. If the 15-minute, if the cities were designed more as a collection of 15-minute neighborhoods, then I could, instead of traveling across the city to access something, I could access it within my neighborhood. And maybe for other reasons, for more specialized reasons, I could travel to other parts of the city when needed. And so I feel like, particularly if we would apply this to Africa, and Africa is very fragmented, as Matt said, that makes it hard to connect people to labor. It makes it hard to access all these different things. If things were designed more at these small collection of 15-minute neighborhoods, then people wouldn't have to travel so much for different things, and that would free up the transit network. I think we see this if we look at the history of cities in the United States, a lot of American cities were first built as company towns. So these large companies came in, they built housing, they built amenities around their company, and people moved there and they were able to access all of these things within a walk or a short distance. They could access their job, they could access their amenities, and this kind of began at the seed for these cities to grow in the future. If we look at some vibrant cities in Europe or in New York City, we see that many people actually live very close to where they work. In New York City, there's the stereotype of you have a shop on the ground level and you live in the apartment upstairs and you just go upstairs to your work. And so when we design cities in that way, it can help the entire city become more mobile as well. I think that's all from our end, Noma.
Okay, thanks, Tommy. Thank you for such an informative outline of what 15-minute cities are. I will now hand over to Willy Vos, who's the CEO of Waterfall Management Company, who provide us with a glimpse outline of the effect Waterfall City has had on urban development in South Africa as one of the smart cities that has been able to practicalize walkability as well as cycling within the Waterfall area, which are some of the key themes within 15-minute cities. Over to you, Willy Vos.
Thank you, Shuma. I must confess, when we started the planning of this, that's about 28 years ago, the concept of 15-minute cities were not, it didn't exist, at least in the format that it is today. But I thought I should just give us a quick background on the development. Firstly, it is a private company, a group of private companies that are developing it. It is not the government. We do have the government's permission on all the relevant aspects of it, transport, environmental affairs, everything that you need government's permission for. But the land is 2,200 hectares in total. It's about 5,500 hectares in size. Another unique component is that it is a 99-year lease development, but it's an automatic lease renewal. We have completed about 55% of our development so far. The commercial leases, I have to say, are in different formats. It's 10, 20, 50-year leases with options, etc. And then, obviously, when you do something like this, funding is also very important. Otherwise, you cannot do that as a private sector. It took us about 12 years since the start of the conception of the plan before we got on site. Today, we have plus minus 29,000 residents that are living here and about 26,000 people that are working here on a daily basis. But I'm going to refer to about 7 components that we think has had an impact on at least our immediate environment. And from some observation in some of the other provinces in South Africa, we have seen some of the components that we have focused on, but that's not necessarily because we did it. I think it just became a logic outflow of what we do. So I agree with Professor McCarthy. The transport component is a very, very important aspect of it. And we in our city, there are many places that you can actually reach within 15 minutes cycling. Some of it a bit further. And to achieve that, we had a very big focus on the overall transport infrastructure, the planning of the roads infrastructure, etc., and also in that process, making provision for cycling lanes, even golf carts, because in some components we do have golf carts, and then pedestrian lanes, as well as for future potential public transport lanes that will be added to the infrastructure that we have. We also have one of the only, the only underground trains system running through our development. In our case, it runs above ground, but we have the service yard of that particular company who's running it, and we are planning to build a station there within the next 5 years that we think will add a lot to the accessibility of our area. Many people from the outside are coming in through taxis or minibus taxis. We have at least 350 of them coming in during peak time in the morning and in the afternoons. And we had to build facilities for those for the transport facility, for the taxis, where they can be housed or held during the day, because the guys wash their cars, etc. They wait until it's their time to take it further. But the roads infrastructure have been designed so that it's a safe environment when you get from the one type of transport into the other type of transport. So transport, as I said, is a very important thing. And then lately, with South African conditions, we've also, with our load shedding, we've made sure that almost all our traffic intersections currently are having backup power, because if you do not have that, it creates a big problem for, during the peak time or any time of the day for that matter, and accessibility then becomes a big problem. We are very fortunate with the location, in the sense that we are one of our national routes is just off the national route on the eastern and western side of it. So accessibility via vehicles are very easy to get into. But once you are in the city, it is possible to reach certain places within 15 minutes. Now, I'd say the maximum that you would take is about 25 minutes by bicycle. That's the furthest point. But that is as far as transport is concerned. We found that almost all our residential developments benefited from the fact that we, right from the start, discussed or planned to have recreational facilities, things like gyms, a clubhouse, restaurant, squash courts, tennis courts. Lately, in some of our environments, we are adding padel or paddle. I don't know how you pronounce it where you are. But many recreational amenities are being built in the environment that we are, and that also makes it very convenient for the residents that live here. As far as walking trails and so on is concerned, we've got about 35 kilometers of walking trails that are in a very safe environment for people. It's actually a little bit more if you add everything together. I would say it's closer to 40 kilometers, but there's a few of our states where you can access into other estates as well. And then we've got bike trails as well, over and above the sidewalks that are dedicated for specific cycle lanes. In the one case, we've got a 18-kilometer mountain bike trail, which is very sought after at this point in time for the residents who live in that particular estate. We've got schools, 3 different school groups are located on our development, and for most of the children in our environment can walk to school very safely. Some of them, because of the LSM, that in some of the groups they can afford to go there via golf carts, so they get dropped by nannies or pairs and so on with that. The medical facilities are also very good. We've got a hospital in our environment, which is, with a car, it's from where I'm sitting at the moment here in Johannesburg, that's about 8 minutes drive. Some people live very close to it, but it's very easy to access. We've got shops. Most people do not have to go out of our immediate vicinity for most of their shopping requirements. And we've got just over 75 restaurants in our environment as well. So many people stay in this particular environment for the entertainment component. One thing that we have realized that in the South African context is quite important is obviously security. People want to be safe, and we have vast amounts of money that we've spent on that with security cameras and armed response and proper patrols and so on, because that is one thing that, you know, for people to walk, they want to feel safe. So we spend quite a bit of energy and time on that. Landscaping has also been become a very important component of our business, and we see that in all the other developments in the Rosebank, Sandton, and other developments around us, where people are starting to focus a lot more on that. And just getting back to the previous components that I've spoken about, we see that in our immediate environment that people are taking more cognizance of the roads infrastructure, making sure that it's at least much more accessible and safer in some components. We can't say that we've changed the thinking pattern of all people in government. It will be very presumptuous to say so, but we do think that by doing what we have done, it has had an effect on, at least in our province, on some of the larger developments. One of those is that we know that in the Sandton area, for example, there's 340,000 square meters of vacant office space, and we have almost nothing. And it may happen that, you know, because we have just over 500,000 square meters of office space in our development. So it may be that people have seen what we have done and rather moved their offices into our environment. Maintenance may sound like you know, a lesser important thing, but in the South African context, it's extremely important with the roads, making sure that those roads are safe and maintained. We have what we call potholes here in South Africa. Vast majority of our countryside roads have that, and in many cases in the cities as well. And we've seen that component actually also impacts a lot, and that's now when you have your vehicle transport, obviously, that are mainly affected by that. The seventh component is the smart city aspect of it. We did plan it as a smart city from the start, but I'm sure some of you don't need to be educated on this, but for us, we do make a distinction between the tech, which is the hardware, the software, as well as the sustainability component in terms of energy and water. And what I always say to guys, you don't have to be rich to think smart. So we hope to show that there's a bit of smart thinking also happening in our environment, because we have access to good and experienced people in our environment. Then obviously through that, the Wi-Fi and as I said, the software helps us to manage the environment better. It also helps us to make our environment a lot safer, because we monitor all the walking paths and bike paths and so on. So in a nutshell, there's many other aspects that I can talk about, but I hope that this gives a short background on what we're about and what we're trying to do. I can't say that everywhere in South Africa people are taking this on. And then, sorry, one last caveat, or not caveat, but a point that I have to make is that we were fortunate when we started this particular development that it was a clean canvas. It was a very large farm, and we were able to do the holistic planning from the beginning that integrated the roads infrastructure, the sewer, the water, electricity, and everything else that goes along with it. And I think most African cities that are older cities are victims of earlier types of design and haven't stayed abreast of what the latest developments are and trends are in the world. And I think it will be a very costly thing to to change some of those aspects in most cases, but it's not necessarily so that it always have to cost money. In some cases, it's more a question of thinking smart. That's more or less my story.
Thank you very much, Willie. Thank you very much for the informative outline. Are there any questions, colleagues? We'll open a Q&A session. People can just raise their hands, then I'll offer them an opportunity to ask a question. Okay, over to you, Mbali. Mbali?
Thank you very much, Chair, for that. Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. I'm very interested in Professor from the UK. I'm sorry, I didn't get his name quite correctly. More especially about, sorry, Professor, yes, I think it's you. I just didn't get your name. I apologize. Professor Matthew McCartney, I've got you now. I'm very interested in your ideas to assist us as, maybe let me put it this way, as South Africa and as African cities, on how do we start to speak and talk about smart cities. The reason being is South Africa is already in that stance, talking about development of smart cities. But at the same time, when you're looking at our governance models in Africa as a whole, but also particularly in South Africa, you will find that the functioning of the development of local as well as whatever in terms of governance system in the country, they're very different. So how do you build in 15 minutes smart cities, but also ensuring that you are catering for the poor of the poorest? The reason why I'm asking this question is because where I've noticed, or in my experience, is that living in Europe, it's far more expensive to live in the city environment compared to living in the rural areas. So how do you merge that based on the fact that you've got to have an economy working around that space? How do you bring in and integrate people in the city and be able to live in that city, and it's a sustainable city and it's an attractive environment for them to live in those areas? That's one question for me for Prof. Matthew. And then for Willie, you will pardon me because it's in the afternoon and my child will be skimming around for my name as well. Please pardon us for that.
No
and
problem.
then for Willie, yeah, just on a high level, I know when this project of Waterfall was being built, it was really private ownership, you know, but right now we have got in government to come in on board as well in terms of the infrastructural maintenance, in terms of extension of the road infrastructure, in terms of ensuring that also we extend it in terms of how do I say it, in terms of job market. But then the challenge is when we're opening it up, for an instance, in terms of our taxi or minibus, whatever, transport mode, which is a very complex issue for South Africa, which hasn't been integrated on its own. How do we make it work to ensure that we have an integrated transport system that is able to bring in our employees into the work environment? But at the same time, Willie, there's another thing that we are looking at, is to say, how do we make living in the city affordable? Because it's affordable for me, who's actually working and has and earning a salary. But majority of our people who are coming to service the waterfall service area are not really coming from the cities that they are, or from the environment that they are actually residing in. They have to take probably a 45 minutes or an hour transport mode of system to actually get into the employment of area. I mean, we can see with the traffic congestion that we have. So my question is, do we actually need the partnership of government more at forefront, or do we actually need to privatize it more so that when we say we are expanding the level of economy expansion, it actually gets to the level that we want to, or it actually brings in the special segregation of our communities that are specially segregated. And thanks, Chair, and I do apologize with the noise with my son. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mali. We'll quickly take the second hand. Momnozbele, over to you.
Thank you, Hloma, and good evening to everyone on this platform, and special thanks to Matthew, Tommy, and Willie for the presentations. And well, reflecting on, of course, the differences in the countries in question, and I think Willie has mentioned some of the fundamental challenges of South Africa. The spatial segregation is caused by apartheid settlements, and then the labor force that would then have to come from the townships into the city, and already there is injustice in terms of distances that are involved in that dimension. And then there is the issue really of property values, whilst and I think there is an attempt, and there is a lot of property development initiatives in South Africa. And I'm just mentioning this because, again, of what Willie said, that would seek to integrate people that can afford lower income houses, at least as closer to the city centers and to areas of work as possible through social housing, the residential settlements. But then when such settlements are built, there is the whole challenge that comes up of property prices, because again, there is this belief that as you bring in low-income residential units like flats that would accommodate the workforce into the affluent areas, then you are threatening the property prices, the property rates, and then you start having pushback from the property owners that their properties would be devalued. And so a 15-minute city concept, therefore, in the South African context, gets immediately challenged. And I guess the transport system as well as still has a lot of challenges that we still have to work in. But I'm impressed with what we already see as cited in terms of the waterfall city and some of the developments around Sandton. Of course, then you have in Sandton that lives side by side Alexandra, and obviously then you are able to have the workforce coming from Alexandra walking into Sandton, and in a way you do get what would be the ideal, but then it becomes the justice in terms of the living conditions of the workforce that works in the most affluent part of the city. But I think what is fundamental, and I'll speak for local government in this instance, and I think it's the whole idea of public-private partnerships, both in terms of configuring what could be the transport system used, and I think the Gautrain is one of those things that are really getting to integrate these cities and are making possible a 15-minute city. But then again, the issue of justice in prices, how do we deal with this? because Gautrain is an invention that is kind of it's new, but and then the other system that you had is kind of crashing in the in the country. So I think what would be your attitude of public-private partnerships to develop a system, a transport system, an integrated transport system that would be affordable for those that have to come from the outskirts of the city, but that would be fast enough for them to reach there. But that would accommodate the present day challenges in South Africa. And I think Umbali has mentioned the taxi industry. But then the issue of safety becomes another dimension altogether. And one of the things that we have brought into the mix is investing in crime prevention. And I think these models that Willie has mentioned in terms of what is happening in Waterfall, where because we're speaking of the concept of crime prevention through environmental design, that as the environment is designed and the cities, the municipalities themselves come into the party in terms of making sure that the public spaces are well lighted, they deter crime. The landscaping that happens to beautify the public spaces, and I've seen what that has done to Rwanda, for example, that every open space in Rwanda is like a park. And the mayor to create that, instead of having shady places that have trees that are not pruned, grass that is not cut, then so all those the crime prevention through environmental design deters crime. And then of course the whole issue of police visibility, and I think the increased workforce in the police industry, as well as in the city police departments, would also augment the efforts that the private security companies are doing. Because in South Africa, and I've been to Sandton, I was attending an evening event, and it was just turning around a corner, and I wanted to walk. And then the hotel staff said, no, in Sandton, you are going to be robbed by a person driving a Mercedes-Benz and not by a person walking. So crime becomes a very serious problem in South Africa. And then visibility of law enforcement agency is still an issue. So of course, closing the whole concept of closing some of the streets off to traffic to make walking possible is one of the ideas then that also come through the crime prevention through environmental design. And I think that concept then, as it is brought into, as we integrate government with the private sector and the community and work together to prevent crimes, I think the whole idea would be possible and feasible. It is feasible and it is happening in some areas, but the spatial justice remains an issue in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll just take the two last questions. Please, colleagues, please be brief and straight to the point when you're either giving a remark or asking a question. Over to you, Mpumelelo, and after Mpumelelo, we'll take James and we'll close that and we'll offer the panelists to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to the panelists. I was just wondering, I mean, in the context of South Africa, I mean, of course, we do want these cities where people don't travel long and people work in the same vicinity, shop in the same vicinity, and all of those things. But I'm wondering that in the context of South Africa, I mean, the whole idea of 15-minute cities, even of such developments such as the Waterfall, I mean, is it not reinforcing like the social class inequalities, right? Because I'm thinking that in the context of South Africa, there's still a lot that we have. I mean, spatially, there are still a lot of things that we need to get in order even before we can start thinking about these 15-minute cities, right? Because half of the time, the people that are working in Soweto, I mean, that are working in Sandton or in Waterfall, most probably coming from the areas such as Soweto and Tembisa, and I mean other surrounding areas. So that's maybe my question, that is this not in one way reinforcing our class struggle that we currently have in South Africa? Thank you.
Thanks, Pumelelo. Over to you, James.
Thank you. Just speaking as an outsider, my name is James Ham. I am the director for the Office of International Affairs at North Carolina Central University in the United States. I just returned actually from living in South Africa the past 2 years as the country director for the Peace Corps program in Pretoria under the U.S. Embassy. And I just want to highlight how important this concept is. From an outsider visiting the country, living in the country, and encouraging now my community at the university to engage in. I think this is a very important concept for academia, for engagement, especially with the higher institutions of higher learning in South Africa, in all of the regions. So I think this should be very much encouraged and supported, this concept, and advanced, and that hopefully the country can be able to make amends to be able to provide resources and support to be able to initiate this. So I just ask, my ask is, and a comment, not only to complement this, but just to be able to grow the academic community in this concept, and so that they can be able to participate, as well as be able to exchange, educational thoughts, resources, and ambitions within this concept. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. Over to you, Matthew, Tommy, and Vili, just for our remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the idea of a smart city, I mean, I think in some ways it's a slightly unfortunate expression because it doesn't have an obviously clear meaning. It's used in lots of different ways by lots of different people. I think sometimes, particularly new cities, can have the luxury of kind of jumping in as smart cities. I think Willie talked of, holistic planning, that this was farmland. You could build decent space for roads. You could plan how the different neighborhoods were going to interact. You could add the concept of smart from the outset. The question of whether making a city smart is a priority for existing cities, I think, is a more moot point. The end of last year, there was a cholera epidemic in Lusaka in Zambia. I think several hundred people died and schools were closed and so on. Maybe not smart, but maybe like the boring basic infrastructure is the priority for Zambia. I mean, in the beginning of the 20th century, 75% of the decline in infant mortality in US cities was due to good water system and good sewerage system. So sometimes it's not about, apologies, my assistants decided to join us. It's not about being smart. It's about the boring basic infrastructure. It's about clean water. It's about trying to ensure adequate space for road. It's about providing affordable housing that is near jobs, not, as in the case of South Africa, affordable housing that's 3 or 4 hours away from jobs. And I think one of the keys is density, is instead of cities sprawling, is building upwards, is changing the planning laws and the rules and restrictions to enable builders to build upwards. So it doesn't have to be glamorous skyscrapers. This can be 5 or 10 story buildings to enable people to relocate in relatively affordable housing near the city centre. I think the tallest building in Africa is still the Johannesburg Carlton Centre, which was built in the early 1970s. So there's a great shortage of tall buildings in Africa, and I think many of the planning laws are quite restrictive. Access to land is quite restrictive, and I think this has to be part of a long-run solution for affordable housing and building housing near places of employment in Africa. That question, I think it was Mpolelo about inequality. Yeah, I think there is a danger of this 15-minute city concept of locking in inequality. I mean, one could be in a neighborhood with a university that's full of students and academics can have a great cultural life, restaurants and bars. You know, if your 15-minute neighborhood, you know, the main factory or mine or whatever has closed, you can be locked into a kind of neighborhood with little in the way of employment opportunities, low tax revenue, decaying infrastructure. And I think 15-minute concept can be important, but I think the big idea for a city to make a city functioning is to emphasize mobility and affordability between neighborhoods and to integrate the entirety of a city into being a single functioning labor market. Thank you. Great questions.
Thanks, Matthew. Any remarks, Tommy, Vili?
Okay,
I'll go.
Okay.
I actually agree with some of the points that Professor McCarthy have just said. But you know, some of these questions are directed at a business guy who's not a politician, and we must. And whilst we are not against the idea of social housing and so on, I think government should become very practical with these things. There's no point in saying that you should build a house for people at the low end of the market, but they don't come to the party with the rates and taxes or the bulk contributions that you do. You build maybe something, but they value it at a very high rate, and the people can't afford the rates and taxes per, you know, on a monthly basis. So I think sometimes it's a great idea, but when you have people who are responsible for paying the land, paying interest, paying literally sometimes it's 1,000 rands a second, you know, or that you're paying in interest if you buy these things. You have to understand what the economic implications of that are as well. So my view is that it can easily be in our environment achieved if the government, local government, the national government was prepared to give tax breaks to subsidize some components of it. But as long as that doesn't happen, that won't be a feasible option in the private sector. In many countries, the government builds the roads infrastructure, they build the, you know, all the bulk infrastructure. In our case, the bulk infrastructure contributions are so high per unit, whether it is a low-cost house or a high-income house, that it's absolutely cost prohibitive. So unless the government think about those components, we can forget about the idea and the social, the social impact, or the social implications, or the practicability of implementing that. And just for the people on this document, we've got a number of areas that are feeding this particular area. We've got Kolfontein, Robbie Ridge, Alexandra, Klipfontein View, Olivenhoutbosch, Ivory Park, and Tembisa. None of these areas are further than 25. It's between 10 and 25 minutes drive with a taxi. So that is also has to be seen in perspective as far as the environment is concerned. I am not saying that one shouldn't go very far and out of your way to try and plan these things. We have actually planned it. There is an affordable housing unit development that we have in our development. There are units that start between, well, when we started off, it was between, in the South African context, 450,000 rands up to today, there's some 800,000 rands units, but it doesn't make provision currently for social housing because we do not get those tax rebates to do so. But that is a discussion, that we can have offline. It's not that we are against it. It's just that unless we have some sane brains on the other side, it's going to be very difficult to be able to implement it. And also, almost everything that the local government is supposed to be doing, we are doing, from a management point of view. So all the rates and taxes that people in this area pay, we pay about 600 million rands a year in rates and taxes from this small area. That's more almost than the whole of Soweto is paying. So you know, one has to take all these things into consideration as well if one wants to go in that particular route. But from our point of view, whatever plans we can work and workshop with the government and so on, we have ideas. We've actually shared ideas in the past, but there's a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of sometimes, I think, inexperience in some cases where people, and then also obviously because people change jobs so regularly, that consistency is also a problem. I don't know if I've answered it. Just maybe one last thing on the roles of taxis. We cannot do without minibus taxis in this environment, and we go out of our way to talk to those taxi associations. We've got 7 different taxi associations that we are dealing with, trying to make the routes, you know, sort that out timeously, and also have proper functionality. And we've decided to build even more facilities for the commuters when they stop and wait and when they get off, because there's different types of transport in our environment that one can use. But one needs to look at how you integrate all these aspects with each other as well. I'm not sure if I answered the questions, but I'm happy to talk offline at a later stage about it as well.
Thanks, Willie. Thank you very much. Tommy, is there anything you want to cover?
Yeah, I'll just say something quick.
Okay.
So there are a lot of questions. They were asking about inequality, improving transit network, affordability. And I think those are valid concerns, but I'm not sure that the 15-minute cities concept worsen those issues. I think those are just general urban problems that we must address. And so if you're looking at 15-minute cities as the silver bullet to address all of these urban problems, inequality, housing affordability, transit, it won't. But, you know, I'm also an economist, and we try to think in terms of counterfactual. And the counterfactual here might be the status quo, right? Currently, many cities in the global south, they are fragmented. They do have bad transit network. They are unaffordable. They have high inequality. And the question when considering a new policy like 15-minute cities, will 15-minute cities worsen this situation, or will it improve it, even if it doesn't end up solving the problem?
Oh, you done, Tommy?
Yeah, that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Nosbele, is your hand still up? Still have a question? Perhaps a
Oh, no,
follow-up question?
sorry, that's a legacy hand.
Oh, okay, thank you very much, man. I think, colleagues, that brings us to the end of our webinar. Thank you very much to our panelists for such an informative session. I think it very much enlightened us, particularly within the South African context. Please be in the lookout for the recording of the session on our LinkedIn page. The recording will be posted, as well as the paper that gives an outline of 15-minute cities will also be published on the LinkedIn page. Please also be on the lookout in our LinkedIn page for our upcoming activities, particularly for the Africa-US City Relations Project. We have a masterclass around smart cities that is coming up around August, but all those details will be communicated to all individuals in due time. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you. Big thank you to our panelists. Thank you very much and good night. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation and thank you for all the
Thank you.
discussions. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and good evening, good morning.
Thank you. Good
Morning.
evening.